When many people think of tanks from World War II, they oftentimes think of the most mass-produced vehicles, or the ones that inspired the most fear in the enemy. These tanks include the venerable M4 Sherman, the T-34, the Tiger, and Panther tanks, as well as many others. What are often overlooked, however, are the tanks that didn't quite make it to the front lines, especially those that came from countries with less of an influence in World War II. One of these tanks is the little-known Nahuel tank DL-43. This is a medium tank that was designed, built, and operated by Argentina during the war. The Nahuel is, as one could imagine, heavily inspired by the M4 Sherman, as it features an extremely similar design, including things like similar suspension type, cannon size, vehicle layout, and much more. While its American counterpart eventually earned the Sherman nickname, Nahuel means jaguar in Mapuche. The origins of this tank stem from several places, including a South America that could have erupted into violence between nations at any time, as well as a need for indigenous designs to be built, as Argentina during the early 1940s could not rely on imports from other nations, especially allied nations, due to Argentina's lax or even favorable view on Germany during a large portion of the Second World War. Prior to World War II, however, Argentina was able to import about a dozen British interwar Vickers-Carden-Lloyd light tanks, of which would help them with understanding tank design, though were soon to be obsolete as the end of the decade neared and tank developments continued at a high rate. Aside from this, Argentina had little to no tank design expertise and very few tanks in their own backyard that they could study. Despite this, in October of 1941, Argentina passed a law that would require the replacement of existing vehicles, such as the aforementioned Carden-Lloyd tanks, to be replaced with indigenous designs. With this law passed, a requirement came in 1943 to the General Directorate of Military Manufacture, of which was the body created to design new weapons, to create a 35-ton medium tank. This design was finalized within 45 days of being received via creation of a wooden mock-up, and was named the 251. Within 2 months of this, a drivable prototype was created, albeit without an upper glacis plate and turret. Still, this marked a tremendously quick turnaround period for Argentina, who, within the space of 4 months, started work on a brand new tank, of which they had zero experience designing and constructing, moving from initial requirement to a fully drivable model. Within a year of this, in 1944, the Nahuel was officially put into production, with 10 such tanks taking part in a parade in July of that year, though 1 month earlier 2 were shown off at an exhibition without a powertrain. The rapid development of the Nahuel owes to several factors, including the aforementioned urgency placed on Argentina by a possible conflict on its own borders and a lack of allied imports, as well as the fact that the design itself was meant to be as easy to design and manufacture as possible, featuring a cast turret, steeply angled armored, and other simplified parts. Further, the Nahuel was also the result of dozens of factories in all branches of the Argentinian military working together, with the Navy giving use of its armor labs and the Air Force providing engines in order to support the effort. Further, other parts, like the cannon, were pre-existing stock in the Argentinian army, being that they utilized the Krupp 1909 75mm cannon, of which could only originally fire HE and shrapnel shells, though AP shells were developed for the tank's usage of this cannon in particular. Though performance of these shells versus armor is unknown, the shells would have had around a 510 meter per second muzzle velocity, which is around 110 meters per second lower than the 75mm M3 cannon carried on the M4 Sherman for its AP shells. Because of this, it can be surmised that the Nahuel would have had noticeably lower anti-tank performance than the similar Sherman, though it still may have been somewhat effective versus older medium tanks as well as light tanks. Alternatively, it is possible that the Krupp cannon was replaced by the more capable and more modern Bofors L40 Mod 1935 cannon, which had AP performance similar to the aforementioned 75mm M3 cannon, though this cannon being equipped to the Nahuel is only in the realm of unsubstantiated rumors. If nothing else, the ammunition that could be used on this improved Bofors cannon was compatible with the Krupp cannon, potentially offering slightly improved performance out of the older cannon. For its secondary armament, this tank was equipped with a single 11.35 Madsen HMG mounted coaxially in the turret and 3 hull-mounted Madsen 7.65mm LMGs in the hull, with the driver and radio operator both operating one each, with the other being mounted above the other two in the upper glacis plate. These MGs were reduced in number, however, after experiencing experience with the M4 Sherman in World War II showed that MG ports were a weak spot, thus the number in the hull went from 3 to 1 LMG, with the 2 extra ports being filled in with armor. The coaxially mounted HMG was then reduced to a 7.65mm Madsen LMG. These of course were all done in their 1947 modifications. Apart from its arguable cannon performance, the Nahuel had fairly good specifications otherwise, with up to 80mm of armor on the upper front glacis plate, with 50 to 65 on the side of the hull, numbers of which would have been considered to be stout when comparing to contemporary medium tanks. Further, the armor itself was of high quality, being comprised of a heat-resistant nickel steel alloy. Because of all of this, along with its steep 55-degree armor slope, the upper glacis had effective armor of nearly 140mm, which was excellent for the time. The turret received good armor as well, with 80mm at the front, which again compared very well with other medium tanks of the era. This relatively good armor came at a cost, however, as the Nahuel weighed 35 tons, which was on the upper end of most medium tanks of the time. Thankfully for the Argentinians, however, the Nahuel was powered by a 500 horsepower aircraft engine that gave it fairly good mobility, of which was more or less on par with earlier M4 Sherman variants, as they both had similar power to weight figures and shared a very similar VVSS suspension. Its mobility was proven during trials, as it capably forded rivers with ease and was fairly reliable in all normal situations, earning high praise from Argentinian military officials as well as from the president himself. Unfortunately, due to timing and many other factors, the production and service life of the Nahuel was short, with only 12 in total being built. These vehicles were upgraded in 1947, with them passing their trials to test the upgrades. Almost immediately after the trials were completed, however, Argentina began receiving hundreds of Shermans and other allied military vehicles, many of which were upgunned 76mm variants. This meant that despite having just been upgraded and again passing trials, the Nahuels were placed into storage within days of the arrival of the imported vehicles. This meant that the service life of these Nahuels was essentially limited to several parades, of which started in 1944 and then ended with them driving themselves into storage in 1948, never having seen any action. While various reports state that they were scrapped over the years, it is difficult to pinpoint exactly when this occurred, though it is thought that the majority of the Nahuel tanks were scrapped by 1960, despite a few still being drivable at that time. The story of the Nahuel is one of determination of the Argentinian people, of whom essentially created a tank from the design phase to actual creation within 4 months, a development cycle that would be deemed incredibly quick for countries with design experience for tanks, let alone Argentina, who had zero experience up to this point. Argentina managed to make a fine tank by all accounts that would have performed similarly on the battlefield to early Shermans, though this would have needed a cannon upgrade had it continued service, as a Krupp cannon was simply not powerful enough to counter the better armored tanks being fielded as the 1940s wore on. Fortunately, the Nahuel was never fielded in the potential war that they feared with their South American neighbors. Because of this, and the surplus of vehicles available at the end of World War II, the Nahuel has since been largely forgotten and is sadly a footnote in the history of armored warfare, despite being a monumental achievement considering the origins of the tank. Today, there are several monuments to this groundbreaking tank that still exist in Argentina, including a statue, though unfortunately, no Nahuels remain in any museums or anywhere else, as again, they were all scrapped. With that said, thank you all so much for watching. Please let me know what you think about this video in the comments below, and if you have another vehicle that you would like me to cover in a future historical video. Either way, thanks again, and I'll see you all on the other side. Take care, everyone.